When the story of America's success is told, it will be told through the eyes of powerful capitalists and businessmen. It will sing songs of economic inequality and industrial growth of the 1800s and the men that championed that growth. Then it will tell tales of the financial boom of the 20th century and the establishment of America as the world's leading economy. This success is a history of rail, agriculture, steel, banks, and the reinvention of Wall Street. And one man's influence and power stands through it all. His name is J.P.Morgan, the man who once single-handedly saved the US economy from disaster and America's foremost super financier. This is his story. Born on the spring of April 17, 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut, a baby John Pierpont Morgan had his life already mapped out for him before his birth. His father, John Spencer Morgan, was a banker and therefore set JP towards the path of greatness in the same field. As a successful man, JP's father gave his son the very best, sending him to elite public and private schools, one of them being English High School of Boston, where a young JP or Pierpont, as he liked to be called, specialized in maths, with the view of having a career in commerce. However, childhood was not always smooth for JP. He would suffer from rheumatic fever at the age of 15, and on the advice of his mother Juliet, he was sent to Azores, an island in Portugal, with the hope that he would recover to continue his studies. The symptoms unfortunately became severe over the years, leaving him in pain throughout his life. But thankfully, he did get better immediately after the visit to Azores, and eventually returned to his books. And so at the age of 19, J.P. Morgan was sent to Bellerive, somewhere in the village of La Tour-de-Pez. There he became fluent in French, a language that would become useful to him and his business in the future. He also attended the University of Göttingen, where he not only learnt German, but earned an art degree within 6 months. Now, you must be wondering what the use of an art degree was to a business magnate. Well, quite useful, because it would prove to be a needed pastime for a man who would be at the helm of some of the most important business deals in American history. J.P. Morgan's journey to becoming a revolutionary figure in Wall Street started right after school, when in 1857, his father brought him on at George Peabody & Co., a merchant banking firm where the senior Morgan was a partner at. And for a decade and a half, a 20-year-old J.P. Morgan would be his father's American representative in a host of New York City banks affiliated to George Peabody & Co., essentially acting as his father's eyes and ears in the emerging financial markets it was at the time. Those 15 years turned J.P. from a boy to a man. They taught him the cutthroat nature of top-level banking and the weight of every single decision at the top. They also lit a fire of independence in him, a desire to be his own man, but he had to wait. Still under his father's watch, JP moved to Peabody Associated Bank, Duncan Sharma, around 1858. He began as a junior clerk and quickly developed a reputation as one of the brightest young men in Wall Street, even earning praise from his impossibly unplaceable father for his work ethic and discipline. It was at Duncan Sharma where he do first gain a taste of the financing and reorganization he would become famous for. This came in the booming rail sector, specifically in Ohio and Mississippi and Illinois Central lines. JP negotiated loans, collected and transmitted interest and divided payments, and executed orders in stock exchange. He was growing and growing fast, although there would be a major decision that cast doubt on his judgment in a few years later. It was 1859, Morgan had been sent to Georgia, Alabama and other southern states to oversee Duncan and Sharma's business in that region. The idea was to help him understand the ins and outs of cotton trade, which he immediately took to and in fairness became a success at, until he decided to undertake a Brazilian coffee trade for profit, seen as completely irresponsible by his father and the people at Duncan and Sharma. Now the question is, why did they think it was irresponsible of him when he turned a profit? Was it just another case of father being overly strict on his son? Well, first off, it was because he bought the entire shipment of coffee at a go. Also, it was because he did not seek any form of authorization before doing that trade. But understandably, JP was adamant he was right, and it was at that moment he thought to himself he would eventually have to escape from his father's shadows. The American Civil War meant Morgan had to delay his plan of opening his own office. But in 1861, he finally realized his dream. In the famous one-room office at 53 Exchange Place in Boston, j.p.morgan and Co. was born. However, he still technically conducted most of his business for his father, just as it was in Duncan and Sharma. JP himself ended up not partaking in the war by paying a substitute an amount of $300 to go instead of him. He did this in order to focus on his business. Smart of him, you think? Maybe, but he could not prevent the decline of his cotton business after all, nor was he able to prevent the reduction of imports for American railroads, from which he also profited. Notwithstanding, things began to look up for Morgan after those setbacks, because through him, his family made large profits in purchasing and selling of Union bonds. After the Battle of Antietam turned the war in the Union's favor. Then came Morgan's first personal breakthrough, profits in gold, when in October 1863, Morgan and colleague Edward B. Ketchum made the transfer of $1.15 million in gold to England, effectively spiking the gold price and ensuring that they could sell their holdings for a good profit. Critics did not find that deal funny, accusing him of profiting from the country in the middle of a war. But for him, it was a sign of growth, a sign that a young banker was developing the ruthless trick that would eventually lead him to success. And so, unsurprisingly, j.p.morgan would be seen as one of the most promising banking houses in America, also because his father would lend him a helping hand. J.S. Morgan, upon becoming the head of Peabody & Co.'s London office, transferred all of Duncan and Sharma's credit and securities to Morgan's own j.p.morgan. Morgan was only 25. George Peabody completely retired from Peabody & Co. in October 1864, effectively handing full ownership to Morgan's father, Junius, who would then rename Peabody as J.S. Morgan & Co. Junius' first role was to hire Dabney, a partner at Duncan Sharma, who was an expert in accounting. This meant that J.P. Morgan evolved to take up the role of recruiting new businesses, a role he excelled at. J.P. Morgan continued to make strides as a young banker and consolidator in the mid-1800s, and to ensure his continued improvement, Junius Morgan would ask Philadelphia financier Anthony Joseph Drexel to mentor his son J.P. This meant that Drexel and J.S. Morgan would merge to become Drexel Morgan & Co. in 1871, the company that would eventually become J.P. Morgan & Co. Led by Morgan, Drexel Morgan & Co. quickly tapped into the dominant industry, the railroad industry. Morgan's approach was unique and effective. He now had the funds to go beyond just facilitating the merger of businesses and taking a cut, to financing those mergers himself and playing a hands-on role in their day-to-day management. This single tactic became known as Morganization, and yes, as you can imagine, a whole lot of Morganization ensued. So with railroad magnate William H. Vanderbilt as his partner, he reorganized smaller rail companies and leased them to Vanderbilt's New York Central holdings, effectively eliminating competition to become a monopoly, hence turning him and Vanderbilt into billionaires. Many other railroad presidents followed the Morgan blueprint, and this sparked a wave of mergers and consolidations in the 20th century, making the railroad business continue to boom as a result. Morganization did not stop in rail though, because JP, as ambitious as he was, would spread his wings into the promising steel industry, and in typical Morgan fashion, steel would even come to overtake rail as the most profitable business in America by the early 1900s. Morgan would achieve this by identifying steel businessmen Andrew Carnegie in a master plan, involving merging small and underfinanced firms across the steel, coal, shipping, and mining industries. JP would then streamline their operations and finance them to establish his own federal steel company. He would then go on to merge with Andrew Carnegie Steel Company, with a few other iron and steel companies with potential, forming the United States Steel Company. See where this is going? Yep. Because US Steel became the world's first ever billion-dollar company, capturing a whopping 75% market share in their peak. That's what you call dominance. Furthermore, Morgan's idea and quest for dominance would extend beyond rail and steel, except this time, his plan would ultimately be remembered by a famous tragedy and a near-death experience for JP himself. Here's how it happened. In 1901, Morgan would move to expand his international shipping arm by creating the International Mercantile Marine Company with his J.P. Morgan & Co. And once again, he did it by taking up smaller American and British lines and creating subsidiaries out of them, including White Star Line, the shipping line that built the RMS Titanic. Exactly, that Titanic. So as the story goes, the Titanic sank in its very first voyage, with more than 1,500 people sadly dying in the process. But j.p.morgan was lucky enough not to be counted amongst the dead, because he was initially booked to board the ship, only for business to prevent him from doing so. In the end, the reputation of Morgan's shipping line suffered a damage in reputation due to the events of the Titanic, and coupled with the American antitrust laws, meant IMMC could not really dominate the shipping business. j.p.morgan did dominate America by exerting his power beyond the realm of business and finance. This was a man whose influence got him into the highest halls of decision-making in America. One of such scenarios happened during the panic of 1907. When a panic hit Wall Street, a financial crisis follows. Investors lose confidence in banks, and the effect of this sometimes even spread across the globe. Jobs are lost, banks go bankrupt, and the poor get poorer. Normally, government will step in to bail out these banks to save the livelihoods of the poor and the vulnerable. But the panic of 1907 was such that even $85 million deposit by the US Treasury in affected banks did little to stop the chaos until j.p.morgan stepped in. Morgan would meet with top financiers like himself, including National City Bank President James Stillman. The plan was simple. They would inject and distribute money between banks, buy plummeting stocks of huge corporations, and even secure international credit lines. And as you would expect, the crisis subsided substantially. However, the effects of the financial crisis had spread through the steel industry before anyone could realize, and yet again, j.p.morgan was there to save the day. The Tennessee Coal, Iron and Railroad Company was used as a collateral by brokerage firm Moore & Sly to borrow large amount of loans. Unfortunately, Moore & Sly could not pay back those loans, and so it meant that if they collapsed, TCI Company would go into crisis, causing further job losses and economic hardship. Given the standing of TCI in the steel industry then, Morgan, whose US Steel was a competitor of TCI, proposed the merger between the two companies. This time, j.p.morgan could not really be criticized for being greedy and monopolistic, because that merger was necessary. Consequently, the merger had to be approved by the then President Theodore Roosevelt due to the strict antitrust rules that existed. And in the end, the panic was over in November 1907. A year later, after the panic, Senator Nelson W. Aldrich led an investigation into the causes of the panic and solutions needed going forward. This gave birth to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System as we know it today. Behind the ruthless and cutthroat business magnate that j.p.morgan was, there was also a loving and caring family man. In 1861, he married his first love, Amelia Sturgis, whom he affectionately called Mammy, but unfortunately, Amelia would die from tuberculosis 4 years into their marriage. In a bid to heal her, JP had traveled with her to Algiers, just as his father successfully did when he sent him to Azores to heal in his childhood. However, it did not work. It is said that Amelia's death was so devastating that it brought out an anger in him that fueled his drive to success. Truth is, JP also found comfort in other ventures. One of such ventures was art, so it appears his art degree did prove useful after all. It helped him maximize the power of art to help him cope with the loss of his wife, and provided a useful distraction to the intense nature of Wall Street. Morgan was known to have had one of the largest art collections in the world. He also was a known gem collector, accumulating over 1,000 of them while he was alive. Upon his death, his collections were given to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, an institution he helped establish. Sadly for Morgan, his health problem would persist throughout his life. Apart from the rheumatic fever he suffered as a child, he also developed a rare skin condition known as rosacea, which resulted in Morgan having pimples and swelling all over his face. The condition later worsened to become rhinophima, which is characterized by having a large nose. This would even invite taunts from people who disliked him, which made him hate being photographed without permission. But although it affected his confidence, it turned into a strength, becoming known as an intimidating and forceful personality in the long run, until his death in 1913. Upon his death, J.P. Morgan & Co. was handed over to Morgan's son, J.P. Morgan Jr. by J.P. himself, just as his father did. Today, J.P. Morgan & Co. has expanded through mergers to become J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the largest banks in the world. The bank now offers a wide range of services, ranging from investments and commercial banking to asset management and private equity. Not only is J.P. Morgan Chase large, It has maintained its importance as an influential financial entity in America, contributing to the rise of the powerful global economic center that is Wall Street. Wall Street did not used to be powerful until j.p.morgan arrived. It was just a bunch of small unregulated businesses fighting each other for attention in an emerging market. But by the time he left, it would become the most powerful financial center on the face of the earth. j.p.morgan was the financier and investment banker who pioneered the idea of conglomerates through the consolidation of small businesses. Morganization, as it is called, is now a master plan which has become a hallmark of America's collective economic growth and the growth of its most successful business empires. Indeed, the story of America's growth cannot be written without the mention of j.p.morgan, America's foremost super financier.